Burning Man. Cars morph into bugs and computer programmers into painted pagans. My old self has been torched. I am reborn. Identity is malleable in festival space. Self-transformation comes more easily. But the question lingers, to what image are we conforming? Festivals promote creative self-expression and sensual enjoyment, and in so doing enable festival goers to go beyond their usual ways of carrying themselves and acting towards others. In order to create a super-real festival world of meanings absent from the workplace and urban landscape, festival goers highlight what is lacking for them outside, such as sexual freedom. They describe enhanced sensory perception and altered awareness, felt through the body and into the mind. I danced myself into a new existence. Themes of sacrifice, redemption, death and rebirth, disintegration and creation suggest for many the experience is profound. Others would call it projection, waste, greed and debauchery blasted onto an empty canvas of air and dust. And others an escape from societal rules that bear down on us daily. Robert Bellah and colleagues in Habits of the Heart point out that when Americans describe their spirituality, they talk most about self-expression and personal empowerment rather than the requirements of community. Burning Man's apocalyptic overtones are meant to both describe the disenchantment and decay of American life today and envision a future that is rejuvenative as well as destructive. Well, doesn't that sound nice? It certainly reads a lot better than this is a place to trip on acid, drink to excess, and find yourself multiple partners. Now, I'm not saying that's everyone's experience of the festival, but this kind of excessive consumption is what I aim to address in this video, namely greed. What seduces one man to use false weights? Another to set his house on fire after having insured it for more than its value, while 3/4 of our upper classes indulge in legalised fraud. What gives rise to all this? It's not a real want, for their existence is by no means precarious, but they are urged on day and night by a terrible impatience at seeing their wealth pile up slowly, and by an equally terrible longing and love for these heaps of gold, for the love of that which at present affords us the highest feeling of power and a good conscience. Jesus warns us far more often about greed than about sex, yet almost no one thinks they are guilty of it. Greed hides itself so deeply, no one should be confident that it's not a problem for them. Enter Zacchaeus. Israel was a conquered nation. Their conquerors, the Romans, levied oppressive taxes. This left the colonised societies impoverished and kept them subjugated. The only ones living in comfort were the Romans and their collaborators, the tax collectors. What could seduce a man to take such a job, betray his family and country, and live as a pariah in his own society? Money. Backed with military force, they could demand more than was required by the Roman government. Extortion, a lucrative business. Zacchaeus was an, and I'm going to butcher this word, Arcatilianus. Probably pronounced that totally wrong, but what that means is an arch tax collector, and he was operating in Jericho, a major customs centre. There would have been a stigma attached to conspicuous consumption and to revelling in wealth, but he wouldn't care, having sacrificed all for money. Luke 12:15, watch out, be on your guard for all kinds of greed. Luke 16:13-15, no servant can serve two masters, for he will either hate one and love the other, or else be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard these things, and they derided him. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. Greed is idolatry. In its most obvious form, we can describe it as daydreaming and fantasizing about new ways to feed the obsession for money, new possessions to buy, and looking with jealousy on those who have more than you do. We look to this idol for our significance, security, and so we have to have them. Therefore, we are driven to serve and essentially obey them. Now this word serve, looking at the context in the Greek, it conveys something solemn, a covenantal service rendered to a king. If, however, God becomes central in your life, that dethrones and demotes money. If your identity and security is in God, it cannot control you through worry or desire. Slavery is most evident in the blindness of the materially orientated. Jesus doesn't say, be careful you aren't committing adultery, because when you're in bed with someone else's spouse, you know it. Halfway through you don't think, wait, I think this is adultery. Of course, there's the more subtle Matthew 5:28, but even there it's obvious. Indeed, the world is so filled with greed and materialism, we seldom think it true of us. Zacchaeus climbed a tree, and this is in a time where freedom and rights were beneath honour and dignity. He was despised and had good reason to conduct himself with dignity, to save face, but he climbed a tree, making a spectacle of himself, eager, even desperate to see Jesus. See, the crowd felt superior to prostitutes and tax collectors. However, Jesus addresses Zacchaeus, the most notorious sinner in the whole throng, an arch tax collector, and not only to talk, but to dine with him, a bonding act denoting friendship, an offence to the proud gathering. But Jesus didn't care. Zacchaeus girded himself, not with pride. See, he refused to let that crowd wash him out. He endured ridicule and he climbed that tree. Luke 19:8-10. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." See, in the Torah, there was rules in place for dealing with extortion. They must make restitution for what they have failed to do in regard to the holy things, pay an additional penalty of 1/5 of its value, and give it to the priest, and must confess the sin they have committed. They must make full restitution for the wrong they have done, add 1/5 of the value to it, and give it to the person they have wronged. See, Zacchaeus gives more. He makes restitution and then offers 4 times as much than is required of him by the Torah. And on the point of tithing, we look to the Old Testament where it says 10%. The New Testament doesn't require an amount, but I think it's useful to think of this, Did Jesus tithe his life and blood to save us? Or did he give it all for us? That's just something to reflect on, thinking about the quality of your giving and of your faith. Are you all in, or only 10%? See, of Zacchaeus it said, salvation has come to this house. Not if he lives like this, but it has come. And so we see how a changed life comes in response to salvation. It's freely given to those who seek. Of course, you can't earn this of yourself. To earn salvation would be to ask, how much must I give? But to be given salvation, it then becomes, how much can I give? Zacchaeus was spiritually bankrupt, but Jesus poured out spiritual riches freely. And it's in response to that grace that we work obedience and live in accordance with the Spirit. See, knowing Christ changed his disposition towards money. It no longer had a grip on him, but idols are insidious. How well can you spot them? Madonna has said that her determination in the music industry comes from a desire to conquer a horrible feeling of inadequacy, the fear of being mediocre and uninteresting, and that this struggle has never ceased to work in her life and probably never will. In 2 Kings, Naaman finds that status cannot make him whole, nor can wholeness be purchased, but through humility to God it can come. Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. See how the writer piles on these accolades and accomplishments, but ultimately he's a dead man walking. Despite his wealth, athleticism and popular acclaim, his skin would inflame, bones crack, and he'll fall to pieces as he dies by inches. C.S. Lewis said, "I don't believe in the economic motive or the erotic motive account for everything that goes on in the world. It's a lust, a longing to be inside which takes many forms. You want the delicious knowledge that just we 4 or 5, we are the people who really know. As long as you are governed by that desire, you will never be satisfied. Until you conquer the fear of being an outsider you will remain." See, despite wealth and power, Naaman was a leper, an outsider, socially alienated, someone in emotional despair. When he heard of the prophet that could cure him, he gathered a letter of reference from the king of Syria and enormous payouts for the king of Israel. He expected to use success to win favour, but the king of Israel was not impressed. Eventually, apart from the pageantry he expected, he would be sent out by Elisha to wash in the Jordan 7 times. And in that humble obedience, the great warrior was cured. And for me, this comes back to the very modern desire of material wealth and excess to attain the ultimate in self-expression and to treat others as means to an end. But self-expression must always be tempered with consideration for one's neighbour. And I'll complete the point now in addressing Richard Dawkins' criticism of Judeo-Christian altruism from the God delusion. Because in too many forms that I subscribe to, I find atheist arguments bristle with hostility rather than even-handed scholarly analysis, and the net result is patent superficiality. Dawkins writes, "Christians seldom realise that much of the moral consideration for others, which is apparently promoted by both the Old and New Testament, was originally intended to apply to a narrowly defined in-group." You see, the reason Christians seldom realise this is because it's completely false. We're told love thy neighbour doesn't mean what we think it means, but it only means love another Jew or love another Christian. Well, the reason Dawkins comes to this conclusion is because he reads Leviticus 19:18, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbour as yourself." But had he read the rest of the chapter, he would have found these words, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." But Dawkins goes further and states that Jesus was a devotee to this same in-group mentality that wasn't taught in the Old Testament. And, it's not even a matter of conjecture, this, because Jesus is asked explicitly what is meant by love your neighbour, and he explains with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the whole point of that story is that neighbourly love transcends ethnic boundaries. See, the misconstruing of Leviticus might be forgiven him, but the abysmal ignorance is demonstrated here in not understanding the most famous parable, maybe in all of literature. That's just, next level trolling. See, we find ourselves to be moral beings, capable of understanding the differences between right and wrong, and there is no scientific root to such ethics, as has been admitted by probably nearly all atheists as well, except from those die-hard converts to scientism. Physics cannot inspire our concerns for others, or, science can't be responsible for the spirit of altruism that has existed in human society since the dawn of time. But, just as the fine-tuning of the universe and the rational intelligibility of nature point to a transcendent intelligence that is independent of this world, so the existence of a common pool of moral values points to the existence of a transcendent moral being. And Jürgen Habermas tells us that the biblical idea of humans created in the image of God belongs in the genealogy of human rights. And that's true. This peace and love spirituality is not simply superficial sloganeering, but something that must be put into practice amid the difficulties of daily life.